What works? Hi, Susie. Thank you for accepting my invitation to have a conversation about the soul and the Supersociety. This is a web series I titled Cultivating the Soul in the Supersociety, Psychosocial Conversation on the Age of Shocks. This series of psychosocial conversation aims to explore the concept of soul and supersociety, addressing topics such as climate change, populism, pandemic, fake news and post-truth, war, energy crisis, inflation, and recession. It also delves into the themes like social justice, sustainability, ecology, integration, diversity, and more. With the advent of the 21st century, we have entered bypassing what German sociologist Ulrich Beck referred as the risk society, what Italian sociologist Chiara, Giaccardi and Mauro Magatti terms the age of shocks, characterized by abundant technology, algorithms, but scarcity of soul. Therefore, the question will be, is there still room to cultivate the soul in the supersociety? Giaccardi and Magatti claim that we now live in the supersociety, a post-liquid society, if we follow Bauman, where mood disorders are on the rise, a society characterized by its global techno-economical interdependence, the inextricable link between human action and the biosphere, and the increasingly intense absorption of subjectivity in the social self-projection process. When looking at climate change, populism, pandemic, fake news, post-truth, but also social justice, ecology, integrations, diversity, what era are we living in, Susie?
Well, I like your idea of the age of shocks, but I also think inexcusably tragic period, a time of destabilization.
Yeah.
And that depends on your chronological age, because, if you're over 40, I think it's really been destabilizing. And it's also an age of dematerialization, where we're kind of bodiless at the same time as everything is about the body. Well, not everything, but huge profits are made on it. So I don't really have a name, but I have those offerings, I think.
And you're a specialist on bodies. You said many times, I like bodies. You wrote books about bodies. I would say I like stories, but this is why I like to talk to you. Instead of the age of shocks, we could call it the age of bodies, yeah?
Well, and bodilessness, right? It's not just the age of bodies, because as you and I think have talked about before, at the moment of more AI or being uploaded to a chip or being dematerialized, the biggest industries in Europe, or the most powerful players, number 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the billionaires list are LMVH, Zara, the owners of Zara, LMVH, Betancourt owns L'Oreal, and Kering, François Pinault. So those are number 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's extraordinary that we think of this as being the age of technology, which of course it is. But in Europe, the biggest players are the ones who are interested in deconstructing, reconstructing, getting us to perform bodies, while representing them all through visual culture, rather than through bodies in the realm of engagement. And we know from youngsters that a lot of them don't engage in the realm of what you and I might call the material world.
Yeah. I remember.
So it's a very interesting moment, and tragically so.
Tragic moment on many, many aspects. But is it possible to cultivate the soul today? Whatever that means, and maybe we can start from that. What does it mean to cultivate the soul? You're a psycho.
Well, I think that's a real, you asked me that question, and I was thinking, coming from a secular tradition, I really never really understood what the soul could possibly be until the phrase soul music came up in my youth. And suddenly there was a music tradition that so touched me and was so linked to listening to music with other people, either in a concert or through the record player. And I recognized something about connection and fortitude and fight back and refusal to give up. Because the soul music of the 50s and 60s, which was essentially African American at that point, was so jubilant as well as so tragic and painful. And it spoke to me at the level of the soul. That's my first experience of soul. Then I think, for me, having soul is to do with connecting. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I know when I was a youngster and I went to demonstrations or concerts, it was a wish I would feel at one with other people, and the wish, and it was all about transformation. And it was being bigger than myself and yet more inside myself, right? And so I can only talk about it from my own sort of particular perspective, which was political and the beginning of youth culture. And I became alive in social movement. So that is where I would put soul for me. But I know that the Jungians and the religious have a completely different tradition of soul than somebody as secular as me. So, and I still feel if I go to a demonstration on climate change, let's say, an Extinction Rebellion thing in the UK, or any one of the number of political events that one could be going to that involves other bodies, other people, sharing concerns, even with different shadings, I think I identify that as soulful and soul.
And this, allow me, maybe I'm wrong, but your generation is very much about this, right? Going to the streets and manifest yourself and demonstrate and shouts. And many things happen because of this, because your generation went into the street. My generation was a little bit different. Like you would go to a demo to skip school, which is awful. In fact, the only demonstration I went to was the 2003 London.
You were scoring women or scoring drugs?
Excuse me?
What were you scoring? You went to demonstration to...
Yeah, I went to demonstrate against the war in Iraq in 2003. You remember that gigantic big...
I do, but that it did nothing, right? So that was the moment of 3 million people on the streets of London, and it was not relevant.
It was not relevant. And then the generation of my daughters, they are 15, 13, and 12. Demonstration? What about? And we go back to the 4 companies. Then let's not be negative and depressive, but the panorama, the scenario has changed completely.
Totally changed. And I don't want to idealize what it was, because there was also, as well as the connection, there was lots of craziness, right, in political factions, the same as there are today online or whatever. But yes, I don't know.
When you go to a demonstration, who is around you? I guess it's your generation.
Well, it's not true. I'm thinking of one during the pandemic, quite a big demonstration at Trafalgar Square around Extinction Rebellion, so around climate change. But there's also big demonstrations almost every Saturday here on Gaza.
Yeah.
So, and there's young people on those demonstrations. It is not exclusively my generation.
But Gaza, now that you mention it, I wanted to raise it in the couple.
I mean, maybe not your daughters, but look at.
No, I tell you, and I want
climate change was.
We have very clear view about Gaza or about what has happened since 7th and 8th of October. The other day, we met a friend who was a teacher until someone complained about her and her Facebook posts about Gaza-Israel situation, and she was fired. So this is the situation in Germany now. It's not on the media. So people are fired.
Well, I don't know. They closed down the Palestinian conference, right? The 3-day conference. I just got a letter about it asking me to sign at the weekend. Yeah, so it is and it isn't visible what's going on, right?
Yeah. And in all this turmoil, AI, body, generation change, now that we more or less have defined what cultivating the soul means, because for a Jungian, cultivating the soul means in these difficult times, the last resource is to go to Jung, while in normal times you go to Freud or to Susie. So you can understand what the word is about. But in this post-liquid society, super society, which does not originate a uniform process, but a non-linear integration, while pushing towards greater verticalization, increases inequalities, and opens new borders. How is it possible to cultivate the soul, whatever that is, which for a Jungian
it's
depth?
Yeah, but I think for me as a clinician, or with friends, okay, because let's go outside of the community of protesting.
Yeah.
I think with the people that I work with in therapy, they are looking for instances of connection, of finding themselves and understanding that finding is to do with contribution. It isn't only to do with the person. The personal is very much about a connection and a contribution, right? That is what I think might mean soul for them, or it certainly means soul for me working with them, is that I feel something profound and that moves me. And I think that's not different in ordinary acts of kindness that I find on the street all the time. Or I don't know if it's soul, because it's not a category I think of, but it's something about what human beings are able to do with each other, that you can do something significant that touches and touches you because you touched somebody else. So I don't know if that's close enough to soul.
I like it because I'm often thinking that what we are witnessing is a move from what Freud called psychoanalysis to what actually should be called psychagogia, which in Greek means accompaniment of the soul, guidance of the soul. Perhaps even, the Oedipus complex, the Electros complex are not interesting anymore because with the coming into a second modernity, the concept of mother and father have changed so much that those coming into analysis are actually coming to look for what you said, for a kind of guidance of the soul of whatever that will generate a new way to be in the society. What do you think?
Yeah. How do you have relationships? How do you have connection? How do you do something that matters to you, matters to other people?
Yeah.
Of course, you can't exempt the circumstances under which, let's say, before they're on the internet, we grow up. So it's still going to be something to do with a grown-ups who have the structure. But the question is, are the grown-ups grown up anymore? I mean, my parents looked like grown-ups, but they weren't grown-ups, right? They did grown-up jobs, but
No.
did they have what we would consider a grown-up psychology? No. And so I don't want to exempt the parental figures or the sibling relationships from being important drivers, shapers of our psyches. They're still there, right? We still have fears that arise from that, as well as the capacity for wanting things to be different or love or whatever. I mean, we still have longings to express and explore, which come from the process of wonderment, of a child's wonderment being enjoyed by others.
But this is where technology, AI comes in, right? When we look for this enjoyment, wanting to be seen, wanting to be loved in a mediated form, could it be?
It is in a mediated form, and look, you get a letter from somebody on email that you don't know, and it can be an enormous source of pleasure if they've connected with something, or you've connected with somebody who you didn't know you shared a realm of hopes with or ideas, right? I'm not of the generation who spends my life on either Twitter or other social media. I mean, I'm just not. It doesn't interest me enough. So I can't really speak about that would be wrong. I mean, I can observe the fact that we've got the kind of pseudo-democratization of feelings where everybody's allowed to feel, but nobody knows how to actually contain that feeling within inside of them. So it's a very confusing picture right now, and also in silos, right? I mean, I don't live where most people live. I live in the strange world of listening and engaging with people, couples, individuals, who tell me about their lived experience while they're living it with me. I mean, it's not exactly where most people are living. You know, I cook and I shop, and I cook and I shop. You know what I mean? And then I work, and I read, and I play games, and I hang out with my friends. That's kind of very different, I think, as a division of time that a lot of people for a lot of people now.
Every time I ask you for a conversation or an interview, I have one question that I have to ask you because of your expertise. I asked you this question 6 years ago, and your answer was very clear. So, how are women today? And I will also ask you, how are men today? Because 6 years ago, I only asked you, how are women? But how are women today?
Okay, so I thought you might ask me this question. And today, a British Council report came into my email. So this does a survey around the world of women. They say harmful societal and gender norms are detrimental. I mean, that's what they say. There's tremendous gap between the laws and the policies and what is done around enforcement, and that digital, nothing that you wouldn't know. Digital life means that there's lots of opportunities for engagement, but there's also lots of opportunity for exploitation. And there are incredible barriers to amplifying what women want. Now, when we look at boys and men, situation is absolutely bleak too. I mean, I think, what is Jordan Peterson or what is Andrew Tate doing unless they're speaking to the awful experience of boys feeling and young men feeling they don't matter or they don't have a place? Absolutely. So I don't think boys and men are doing so well. I mean, I see lots of lovely men, but I also see men in a lot of difficulty. And kind of being lost and playing to camera and playing to performance and accumulation. I mean, all kinds of values that are now the main values in our society.
Yeah.
It's very hard when you've got a presidential candidate who is known to be a rapist and a cheat and a liar, representing masculinity. I mean, it's just impossible.
Read. I thank you for this. This links to a paper recently wrote, and the title is The Age of Hypocrisy. And I'm making a parallel between the early 20th century and the early 21st century. Both centuries started with an opening, no borders. So early 20th century in Europe was amazing. Basically, everybody was friendly with neighboring countries until there was a regression. First World War and what came after, compensation and reparation. The last 20 years of the 20th century were again about opening, globalization, equality or pseudo-equality, and now there is again a regression. War in Europe, war everywhere, basically. You're a feminist. There has been a lot of polemics about feminist or certain part of feminism and the issue of transgender, for example, transgender woman leaving Ukraine as woman and being stopped at the border because by the passport, they are men. Many young boys or young girls have a wish to transition. This was also described by Joseph Roth or, for example, Stefan Zweig at the beginning of the 20th century. Let's call it swinging genders as an enhancement. Could it be, it's a proposal and I hope it doesn't sound offended, but could it be that what we are witnessing right now and what was witnessed around the 20s, the swinging years, the swing in Berlin, the swing in London, is actually a kind of astrological retrograde, with or without the astrological? Too much openness brings, for example, to what could be termed today broken queerness. And it's fatal. It's like we're going through an open world where really integration, diversity, and equality matters, but then the opposite happens, and it's cyclical.
Yeah, but you can make that argument. You could make many arguments about that period. You know, whether you want to look at Weimar, whether you want to look at 21 Allied invasions into at the beginning of the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
Whether you want to look at cultural stories. So yes, cultures close and open. That's absolutely true. I don't think the markers is the swinging. I think it's minor. I think it's the reorganization of capital that's critical, both at the end of the First World War and now with the fact that techno is the reorganization of capital. And yes, of course, you get modifications and experimentation, and it's not always decadent like it was in Weimar, right? It's not always decadent. It's exploratory, but it's also bloody confusing because nobody knows how to live. And because of the kind of dematerialization of the body, and because there's been so much stress on it, all sorts of solutions from trans to anorexia are being found by people. And it doesn't mean that they're settled when people make those attempts to find a place. I think it goes back to the age of shocks and destabilization.
One shock after another, or like one earthquake after another, and this.
Well, that's Naomi Klein's idea of the shock doctrine is very, very important as a way to reorganize. And, you know, she's had so many examples and we're still in that. And it's so obvious in the UK that the transfer of money and this transfer of power from the people who were working class to lumpen, lumpen and working class and lower middle class to precariat to the rich is just phenomenal. I mean, the rise in inequality is horrendous here, as it is in North America, and I presume in Germany. although Germany still has some basis of social engagement.
Yeah, but it's eroding, you know.
Yeah, of course it's.
When you go to your doctor, knowing that the German system is the most stable in Europe, health system, for example, and your doctor says, we stop seeing patient or we stop taking new patient because the new government, which is a center left government, cuts on health. You say, am I in Germany or am I back to Italy, Spain, or somewhere else? Maybe the UK, the NHS has been a joke for a long time. Perhaps now is better. I have my last question. I promised you 30 minutes. We're almost there. And it's a difficult question because it's really about the age of hypocrisy. And I know I'm asking this question to a secularized Jewish woman, or a woman that was born from that heritage. Why was it so easy to side with Ukraine against Russia? Why very few people have the courage to say, I side with Gaza?
I don't think that's true here. I really don't think that's true. I think, in fact, it's the opposite here. I think a lot of people are siding.
Here you mean UK, right?
Yeah. And New York, I don't know, and the metropolitan areas in North America. I mean, the demonstrations here are very, very big. The public concern is very big. Jewish intellectuals have been quite prominent in critiquing the actions of the Israeli state as presently constituted.
What do you think when you're talking to someone, as I was recently, and you try, as many people, trying to make the distinction between anti-Semitic or anti-Sionistic, non-Sionistic, and they would say, if you claim this, if you are anti-Zionist, it's to be anti-Semitic but repress it, or repressed anti-Semitic.
Of course, there's plenty of that, but that isn't really what. Then the two are not the same to me at all, and they're not true for a lot of people. I'm offended by anti-Semitism, but totally offended, and it's not that it isn't here. It's particularly in London, right? It's quite obvious. But that's really very, very different than having a critique of that project. You can have a critique of it, a whole lot of projects that came out of the collapse of the British Empire. You can have critiques of settler communities, whether you're in America or, I mean, all over the world. We know that these are really profound critiques that we can support. However, they're not the same as they're not the same as anti-Semitism to me.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Stefano.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Okay, I'm going.
Bye. Ciao.